All right. Hello, everybody. I'm the Worldsmith, and it's good to be with you guys this evening. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about how you should look into balancing the magical aspects of your story with the mundane aspects of your story. Now, of course, this is primarily a fantasy topic, but it has some greater implications into how you can approach sci-fi and other formats as well. Just a general problem-solving mentality and world-building insights. So stay tuned even if fantasy isn't really your shtick. Now, to go a little bit further into what I mean by the magical and the mundane, well, I guess to put it simply, how does a swordsman combat a wizard? Is that possible in a given fantasy? How many swordsmen is one wizard worth? How many swordsmen does it take to kill a wizard? Or how many wizards does it take to knock down a castle or kill a dragon? So there's different things that kind of vary, and the general answer is going to be entirely up to one sentence, one phrase. It depends on the story. Now, the reason why this matters is because there's so many things that go into this, and so it's more along the lines, this video is going to be more along the lines of describing how you should approach the problem, what questions you should answer, and generally by giving examples of potential solutions that have been used by different authors in the past, and even in folklore and mythology. So let's just get right into the solutions with one caveat. I want you to understand that these solutions are only as limited as your creativity and imagination. It's your story. You can do what you want with it. You're ultimately the authority on what goes on. As long as it makes sense to you and you can have it make sense to somebody else, then you'll be all right. Okay? We're cool? Sweet. So, moving on from there. Now, moving on from there, let's start with our first general example. A way that is very common for people to balance magic with the mundane world in a fantasy story is quite simple. Not everybody can do magic. It's not available to everyone. The Muggles in Harry Potter, normal people, they don't use magic. The wizards do. Now, that is surface level stuff. That's actually very common even in stories where there are other ways to balance magic. And this is only viable depending on a couple factors. How powerful is the magic? If the magic is more powerful and this is your only balancing mechanism if you want a fairly balanced combat world where a soldier is still worth something ultimately, for instance, then you need to make sure that the number of wizards that occur is fairly low. Again, only if that is your only balance system. However, if your magic is not nearly as high level as high powered, or if magic combats magic more directly on a separate plane of fighting, as I'll discuss in a later kind of approach, then you can have more wizards and still have a fairly powerful magic. So you can see how the problem already is a very interesting and complex problem that you ultimately have to decide and solve for yourself. Now, a second general example that you might see in, say, folklore shows like Supernatural and various other media and fantasies and fictions is the magical is selectively countered by the mundane. So salt stops a demon right in its tracks. It can't cross salt, and the actual reasoning behind that, by the way, is kind of interesting. There is I'm not sure where it comes from, but there's some folk tale that says that if you have a path of salt in front of a demon, it has to stop and count each individual grain, and as a result, it's effectively a complete stop if the salt line is large enough, because it'll take them so long to count it, they don't even try. That's the origin of that for anybody who didn't know. Another thing that you might hear of is wrought iron, pig iron, cast iron, which is three names for essentially the same stuff. They're higher carbon than what would be classified as steel, and thus they're very hard and brittle. Now, these things have been used to have a either cancellation effect, a warding effect, or some other kind of anti-magic effect to them. So sometimes a cast iron weapon is very effective against a witch or a warlock. Sometimes a cast iron ring is all you need to be protected from most spells. So you can see how that's an example of something mundane that an average person has access to could protect them from magic. So maybe there's a mithril equivalent, a wonder material, wonder metal, in your story that is extremely anti-magic, and that would serve as a way to protect a normal person from that magic. Now, of course, that's also going to vary entirely on how common the material is. Cast iron is extremely common, even very far back in history. But if a mithril-like material could be, since it's a fictional metal, of course, it could be extremely common, like cast iron, or it could be exceedingly rare, as mithril is in Lord of the Rings. So that's another potential answer to the problem. Going on to a third potential answer to the problem of balancing magic and the mundane is something I hinted at just in the first point, and that is that magic plays on a different level. Magic counters magic in order to protect the mundane. This is done very well in the inheritance cycle, so quick backdrop. In the inheritance cycle, and hopefully this isn't too spoily for some people, but it turns out that later down the line that there are death spells. Certain spells that require very, very low amounts of energy to kill a man, and it involves getting into their mind and pinching off blood vessels, essentially, to kill them with the equivalent energy of pinching something. And you could slaughter whole entire armies with these spells with very low effort comparatively. Well, when that kind of power is in the hand of a wizard, what stops the battle from being a battle of wizards? The answer is nothing. It actually is a battle of wizards, and that's how Pliny described it. It was very interesting. So you'll have a division of an army protected by this wizard, and he's facing off with his division against a different division of the opposing army with their wizard. And that wizard is fighting this wizard, and if one of the wizards falls from an arrow, from some kind of spell, from the other wizard getting into the first wizard's brain, into their mind, and stopping them from continuing to fight, then that entire division of the army would fail. It would literally die right there. And that's actually an interesting aspect of how you can counter magic with magic and have that keep soldiers relevant. Another example could be that magic is inherently divine, or exclusively and inherently divine. So in order for magic to be used at all, it has to be through rigorous dedication and religious practice. And if that's the approach that you go with, then your most powerful casters are going to be the archpriests, the high priests of a given deity. Now, the effect that that has is they're going to be entire sects of magic that very likely wouldn't be viable for war. They might just be healing magic, or magic that might look into the mind. Then you might have a fire god who's all about smithing and crafting, and he doesn't want his magic to be used for war, or not used in war directly, maybe used to make swords, but not used as a fireball, for instance. And so if you were to try and use that for that purpose, that god might say, not going to happen. So that puts a constraint on what magic can do. And so you get a little bit of a hint of where I'm kind of going with this. Ultimately, there's got to be some kind of cost to magic. So on cost specifically, there's two more common costs. There's something else that's kind of done in Harry Potter to an extent. Magic is expensive. Now, there are two kinds of expensive. There is expensive in terms of the effort it costs to train somebody to use it, and there's cost, like money, expensive. When it comes to effort and training in order to use magic, that's very closely connected to, I have to send this young witch, wizard, warlock, sorcerer, insert generic magical spellcaster name here, to this school, this university, this master, in order to learn magic. Now, that very commonly is a multi-years process, and as a result, you are going to have to pay for things like food, or if nothing else, you're short a person that could be fighting elsewhere. This can also be a bit cheap if you look at it from a certain perspective. So an individual wizard's personal cost to learn magic could have been very high. It cost him 20 years of his life, for instance. But the cost to the kingdom at large could be effectively zero, because all they have to do is feed the guy, or if the mages, the master wizard that's teaching him has his own farm or something, or servants, or some other way of producing food that's essentially zero cost, which you start running into that feeling cheap, in my opinion, if you do that kind of thing. But at that point, the only cost to producing wizard is that particular wizard's personal time, which is a cost, but I would argue that it's not enough of a barrier by itself. Now, if you combine this with not everyone can be a wizard, so you find out this person has the potential to be a wizard, then it takes 20 years to then become a competent war wizard, then you might have something worth talking about, because then you first have to find the person, which makes it expensive. Then you have to train the person, which is going to take 20 years, or 10 years, or 5 years, or 40 years, whatever the number you want to select for your story is. then there's infinite numbers of ways that you could tie it in together. Maybe on top of that, it's also countered by magic itself. So there's different ways that it interacts. Um, and this also is generally a more focused topic for harder magic systems. Soft magic systems tend to use magic to create problems, in which case it's not nearly as important for magic to be intentionally balanced against the mundane forces of war or other aspects of life, because magic could theoretically be used in crafting swords and in art and other kinds of creative opportunities, which I would love to talk about in a different video, and I will at some point. So, as you can tell, and as I've kind of gone over and said it a few times, I'm going to say it again, this discussion is extremely dependent on what your story needs, what your world building entails, what you're trying to accomplish in your story. And as a result, I can't give you even a set of golden rules. I can't even accomplish that. Nobody could, because it's dependent entirely on you as the author and your story's needs and what you want. So you have to find that for yourself. Now, I will reiterate before I get to some closing comments that the number of solutions that can be come up with is entirely limited by your creativity. So if you can come up with some really creative solution, something I've heard of before, it was really creative, was magic requires that you lose a part of yourself, not like metaphorically, metaphysically, spiritually, like lop off your arm to use magic kind of stuff. That's a very drastic cost. And then you'll start having a society of people who don't have arms because they use magic once. Now you can kind of see how a normal physical warrior would be kind of important. So that kind of gives you another idea of a creative possible solution. So you can see that, and I'm just using that to reiterate the point, that your creativity is the limiter here. Push yourself, think about it. Don't be afraid to discuss it with your friends, with your family. Sit down with a good friend of yours that maybe is writer-minded, maybe they're just a reader. Think about it. If you're the meditating type, maybe you could meditate while thinking about it. Personally, I like to enjoy a pipe while I'm talking with a friend about it because it helps slow me down and stimulate thought. And that might work for you if you're open to that. So there's all kinds of different ways that you could approach the problem, and it's really important that you discuss it with people because it can help flesh out the ideas faster, and you can realize that a particular line of thought is silly before you've put yourself out there. That has to do with how rationalization of the mind works. You can have a bad idea and rationalize it all you like, but talking about it with somebody can help ground you. So can a pen. I really like thinking with a pen as well, and I'll have a video on that in the future as well. So as a general concluding, wow, that was sophisticated. A general concluding statement, balancing the magical with the mundane is not critical in that you have to make sure that a single soldier is worth a single wizard. It doesn't have to be that way. You choose how that hierarchy works. That's entirely up to you. Now, that being said, this is an issue that you really should wrestle with. Stumbling on it can lead to inconsistencies in the story. And if you have consistency throughout the story, it will feel better for you as you write. It'll feel better for the reader as they read. And if you happen to write something that's so amazing that people want to write fan fiction of it, then they have something that they can go by that's a hard and fast rule and understanding how it works. And instead of having a vague, maybe this works, maybe that works, it's up to me. That's okay too if that's what you want, but understand that ultimately it's good to have a solid, preconceived, planned idea of how to approach this problem. I think that ultimately you will benefit as a writer and your work will benefit. For those of you who are just watching because you're interested, now it's something to think about when you read your next story. So enjoy that. That's all I really have to say to you all this evening. Thanks for tuning in with me. I'd like to see you again soon. I plan to have another video out maybe this weekend. So, let's see how that goes. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you actually know when I put a video out with certainty. And yeah. I meant to say goodbye there, but the recording got terminated a little bit early. So, goodbye. Have a good one, guys. See you again soon.